Welcome to a Team SNG deck profile. Today we are going to be doing a deck profile of the Amazement archetype, which recently came out. While I got your attention, I'd like to ask you guys, leave us a like, leave us a comment, and leave us a subscribe. This deck is truly one of a kind. It's really incredible. I love how it uses other archetypes in its artwork as amusement park attractions. I think that's a really cute idea. But it's a trap-based deck that based on trap equip cards. So it's a really interesting way of controlling the board. And a lot of your cards, because they end up as equip cards, are cards you can activate multiple times because they effectively are continuous traps that you can activate each turn. And they have different effects depending on whose monster they're attached to. That all being said, let's get into it. So, starting off with our monsters, we're going to start off talking about our Amazement monsters we run. We run 3 copies of Amazement Attendant Comica. So this is a really interesting card. I really like it. When it is normal summoned, you can actually search out an attraction trap card from your deck to your hand, which is all of your Amazement traps, except for Amazement Family Faces, which does kind of annoy me, you can't search that out. And as a quick effect, you can target one of your Amazement traps and equip it to another monster on the field, whether it be a monster your opponent controls or it be an Amazement monster that you control. This is really clutch because if your opponent's got a monster that's protected against targeting, you can't target them with your Amazement traps, but you can use Comica to equip them with your Amazement traps by targeting the trap and then changing what it's equipped to. So I've used this in a tournament a few times where, as a quick effect, I've targeted one of the traps I have on the field, equipped to maybe Comica herself, and then I've just shifted it over to my opponent's monster before activating its actual effect. Next, the boss of the deck, the Amazement Administrator Arlekino. So this is often related to Altergeist Multifaker of the deck, and that does sort of somewhat live true. He's got lots of different effects. But basically, if a trap card is activated, you can special summon him from your hand. There's your Multifaker right there. He can also banish attraction traps from your graveyard to pop cards on the field equal to the number of traps banished. Now, I wish this was a quick effect, and it really is a shame it's not. But it's not the end of the world because, you know, you're typically going to end up with a few attraction traps in your grave, and him being able to banish them off to help blow up your opponent's field on your turn is still really useful. Finally, he's got one more effect that's really great. If your opponent normal or special summons a monster, you can target one of those monsters that was normal or special summoned, and equip an attraction trap directly from the deck to that monster, meaning that he acts as every single attraction trap you've got access to. Amazement Administrator Arlekino is the big boss of the deck, and that is with good reason, because being able to get himself on the board, being able to get your attractions on the board, and being able to blow up your opponent's field with spent attractions is really, really good. Finally, for monsters, we run 3 copies of the infamous Ash Blossom. Now, I don't run a ton of hand traps in a lot of my decks. Ash Blossom is the most versatile hand trap we've got in the metagame right now, so I do run her if I run anything. In this deck, an Ash Blossom can definitely be crucial. This is for our monsters. On to our spells. So we're going to talk about the Amazement spells first. First of those being Amazement Precious Park. So Precious Park is the field spell for the archetype. What it lets you do is, during your main phase, you can activate an attraction trap the turn you set it. So that's really useful because if you have to go second, being able to see this, set a trap, and still activate it like a normal equip spell can be really crucial. Because if you've then got your Arlekino in hand, that will let you special summon your Arlekino from your hand as well. The other thing it lets you do is it lets you swap out your attraction traps. So you can, during the end phase, target an attraction trap that you control, send it to the graveyard, and then target one of your banished or in your graveyard attraction traps and set it back to the field. Meaning if your Arlekino's banished off something that you'd like back, your Amazement Precious Park can definitely get you back those traps and put you back in the driver's seat. Next, I run a card that isn't necessarily run in a lot of decks, but I think it's got its useful perks to it. And that is 2 copies of Amazement's Special Show. I really like this. It's a quick play spell. It lets you bounce your Amazement monsters out of harm's way, but what I really use it for, if I've used Amazement Family Faces to take something from my opponent, their monster is treated as an Amazement monster. So I can actually target their monster, bounce their monster back to their deck, and then special summon an Amazement from my hand. So that's really nice as well. And Special Show, it definitely is an interesting form of removal the deck has access to. Finally, for the Amazement spells, I run 3 copies of the Rota for the deck in our Amazement Time Ticket. Amazement Time Ticket, you pay 800 life points, you add an Amazement card from your deck to your hand. So that will let you search out your Amazement Family Faces, but typically you're going to be using it to search out one of your 2 Amazement monsters if you don't have them on the field or in your hand already. If it's your opponent's turn when you activate this, you get to set an attraction trap directly from your deck to the field. So that's, again, another way of getting around your opponent's pesky ash blossoms and giving yourself those traps on the field. As you know, I like to keep my decks that I feature quite budget. However, you could play this deck with an alternative, but I am currently running it with 3 Pot of Extravagance. And that is just because it is the best draw card for the deck. This deck really doesn't use its extra deck at all. It has no need for it. It controls the game with its equip traps and its Amazement monsters. So there is no need for the extra deck to be utilized, making Pot of Extravagance a really safe play. If you wanted to play a more budget version, you could potentially play Pot of Duality in this place of this, because Pot of Duality will let you draw cards, and you're not typically going to special summon on your own turn. You're most likely going to be doing it on your opponent's. But realistically, Pot of Extravagance is your best bet. On to the trap lineup. So there are a lot of attraction traps that we run, and these are the ones that can be searched out by your Arlekino and your Comica. So we're going to talk about them. The first being 2 copies of Amaze Attraction Cyclocoaster. Like all the attraction traps, has 2 effects. The first of these effects is if it is equipped to your monster, and the second is if it's equipped to your opponent's. So if it is equipped to your monster, you can target a spell trap that your opponent controls and send that card and this card to the graveyard. If it's equipped to your opponent's monster, you can add an Amazement monster to your hand from your deck and then destroy this card. So either way, this card is going to end up in your graveyard, but that's not the end of the world with your Amazement Park being able to bring it back whenever you require it. Next, we run 3 copies of probably the best attraction trap in Attraction Horror House. Horror House, if it's equipped to your monster, you can target a monster on the field once per turn and negate its effects till the end of the turn. If it's equipped to your opponent's monster, you can flip that monster face down. So it acts as a Book of Moon, which can be really useful for stalling out Link and Xyz plays, but ideally what you're going to be using it for is its impermanence-like effect of being able to target something and turn it off. Next we run 2 copies of another less popular choice in Amazement Attraction Merry-Go-Round. If it's equipped to your opponent's monster loses 500 attack for each attraction trap that you have on the field. So it's basically a debuff for your opponent. If it's equipped to your monster gains 500 attack. Finally, for the attractions, I run another unpopular choice in 2 copies of Amaze Attraction Rapid Racing. If it's equipped to your opponent's monster, you increase the equipped monster's level by 1 and change it to defense. So again, that can mess up Synchro and Xyz space strategies, which is really useful. If it's equipped to your monster, you could target a card in your opponent's graveyard, spin it back to the deck, and then change your monster to defense. So, not super useful, but it could potentially mess up grave-based plays. The reason I typically run all of these is because they are all really useful, and if they end up in the graveyard, they're still valuable there. And I like to have different names, making my Arlekino as powerful as it can be. Finally, we've mentioned it a few times in this profile already, but we are running 3 copies of Amazement Family Faces. Now, this is the crackdown of the archetype. If you have a monster on your opponent's side of the field that is equipped with one of your attraction traps, you can activate this, take that monster, and then it becomes an Amazement monster, which is why it pairs really well with Amazement's Special Show, because you can then bounce it back and then special summon an Amazement monster from your hand. So that's really useful. It's a nice, interesting way to remove things from your opponent's field, whether you're taking it or you're bouncing it by pairing it with Special Show. The one downside, as I've stated, is that it's not an attraction card, meaning you can't set it or search for it with either of your Amazement monsters. Next, we run a few generic sort of trap lineup cards. First of those being 2 copies of Lost Wind, 2 copies of Solemn Strike, and 2 copies of Solemn Judgment. You don't need much more of this. You've got your negations in your attraction traps with your horror house, and you've got the ability to do all sorts of weird stuff with the different attraction traps that we run. So, Solemn Strike and Solemn Judgment, very useful cards to have. Lost Wind, again, being able to negate a monster effect in addition to what else we've got kicking around in the deck is also nice. Now, you'll notice I run 2 of a lot of the normal traps, and that is because I am running 3 copies of Trap Trick. I run at least 2 of all the attraction traps. I run 2 Lost Wind, and the reason for that is literally just so if I end up drawing into Trap Trick, I can play almost any trap out of the deck. And this is based on the situation that my opponent is putting me in. So that does it for our main deck. On to our extra deck. You can do what you like with the extra deck, you really can. I'm running a full Nightmare package in here with 2 Cerberus, 2 Phoenix, 1 Cerberus. I'm running 2 Unicorns, you could easily run 1 and run something else if you wanted. And I'm running a Nightmare Griffin. Again, you don't need to run any of this, this is all totally up to you. I'm also running a couple Link 4s to push for game if I ever end up with the material on board, which typically won't in this deck. But I got a Borreload, a Boral Sword, and an Appaloosa. You're not really going to do a whole lot with them. They're not likely to hit the board. Next, I'm running a rank 7 monster, and that is literally just because Arlekino is level 7, so I have the ability to make it if I end up with 2 Arlekinos on board, and that is number 11 Big Eye. Taking stuff off our opponent's board is always nice. However, typically, if I've got 2 Arlekinos, I'm probably not going to want to make a Big Eye because the Arlekinos are more useful on the field. Finally, I run some Waking the Dragon targets, and I know, I don't run it in the main deck, but we'll talk about side deck in just a second. And that is 1 copy of The Last Warrior from Another Planet, 1 copy of Naturia Exterio, 1 Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon, and finally a Red Supernova Dragon. All of these are just really useful for putting my opponent on their back foot. I've actually won a few games at locals by just putting out The Last Warrior from Another Planet when my opponent has been foolish and lightning stormed my back row. On to the side deck. So we are going to talk about a side deck. I don't typically, but this deck can really do well or poorly based on a die roll, and so having a side deck that's competent is very useful. Much like the main deck, I'm running 2 of a lot of normal traps in here. Starting out with 2 Titanicider, which is basically Lost Wind for the extra deck, 2 Dimensional Barrier because it can shut down entire matchups, and 2 Network Trap Holes because being able to banish stuff off from our opponent's field when they try to special summon from the grave or from the main deck is really useful. All of these have their uses depending on what matchups I end up against. What I typically take out is the unpopular attraction traps to make room for whichever of these I'd like. The nice thing is, Trap Trick gives me access to all of them whenever I might need them. Now for, once my opponent has figured out I'm playing a trap-based deck, it is also quite a good idea just to side in those Waking the Dragons as stated, because your opponent is going to likely want to blow up your back row. I run 3 of this because you don't typically want to set it with Trap Trick because then your opponent will just avoid it. Now, once again, you're typically also going to find yourself going second in round 2 if you've won the dice roll in round 1. And that is, well, it can be a problem. But evenly matched is definitely a really good out to letting you go second because you can blow up your opponent's board and then after it's resolved, you can activate your Arlekino in hand and special summon him to the field. Finally, we have one more going second card, and that is Dark Ruler No More. This is not an OTK deck. You do not mind not being able to do battle damage. The goal is to set your field and your graveyard up and just blow through their field and control the board state. So this deck really can do that in the later rounds, and that's why I wanted to talk about the side deck here when typically I don't bother. So, my final thoughts on this deck. Well, this deck is definitely a rogue contender at best. The ability to search out your attraction traps and fine-tune your plays with your Amazement Attendant Comica and your Arlekino is really nice. Being able to get Arlekino on board and maintaining him on the field is also really crucial to this deck's main strategy, since him on the field puts your opponent on their back foot. The ability to search both of these out with our time ticket, or to set an attraction trap directly from the deck with our time ticket, depending on what turn we activate it, can also be really useful for controlling the board state. Typically, I find myself using time ticket to get myself to my Arlekino, but sometimes I will set the time ticket so I can put whatever trap it is I want on the field. Going second can definitely be difficult with this deck, and I think that the field spell is really clutch in helping us go second because it can let us still get Arlekino on board and it can let us utilize one of our attraction traps on our opponent's turn. And speaking of, the ability to search and pop back row and the ability to stop monster effects and flip them face down in our 2 more powerful attraction traps is really useful. However, our backup traps in Merry-Go-Round and Rapid Racing, they still give us names in the field, and the debuffs that they grant our opponent and the buffs that they grant us can definitely be crucial in certain matchups. They will typically get sided out, but that's not the end of the world. Finally, being able to take stuff off of our opponent's board with our family faces and give it to us to utilize is really nice as well. That all being said, our entire trap lineup here, being searchable with Trap Trick, gives the deck the versatility that it really requires to control the board state and to dictate the flow of play. That all being said, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Make sure to leave us a like, leave us a comment, leave us a subscribe, and I will see you guys at the next video.